Great. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'm Matthew Gibson. I'm Executive Director of Virginia Humanities. I want to welcome you all today to this information session about the American Rescue Plan funding that we'll be distributing over the next few months. So today we're really looking at this as you to get a chance of how to navigate the application, what the eligibility requirements are. Just a reminder, if people could mute themselves, that'd be terrific. Just to get a sense of what the eligibility requirements are. And of course, most importantly, my colleague Sue Perdue will be walking you through the application process. You can actually get sort of a deep dive and a sense of what that looks like. We're trying to make it as easy as possible. Just want to remind people, if you're on your phone, can you please try to mute? That'd be great. So just to give you a sense of what the requirements are, give you a deep dive into what the application process looks like. And then, of course, most importantly, we'll give you a chance to ask us questions about the review process. But first, I'm going to hand this over to my colleague, Sue Perdue. Before I do, I'll also introduce my colleague, Director of Virginia Humanities Community Initiatives Office, Justin Reed. Also on the call, thanks to for putting this really together and coordinating the webinar, is Raina Mitchell, my colleague, and then also, of course, my colleague and Chief Information Officer of Virginia Humanities, and really the person that's running the American Rescue Plan. We're calling them actually the State Humanities American Rescue Plan funding, Sue Perdue. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Sue. Thank you.
Thanks, Matthew. Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. We are really honored to be able to provide this funding to the state humanities organizations, and actually more broadly speaking, to organizations doing humanities work. Many of you may have received CARES funding from us last year. We're welcoming you to come back to us for funding again this year. And the good news this year is we have more money, and also the restrictions are looser in that we are able to give money to organizations that typically don't get humanities funding to help you do humanities programming. NEH is the federal organization providing this money, and they're simply asking us to make the case that this work is helping you to recover from, respond to, and plan for the pandemic. That's as broadly defined as the requirement is. So you'll see in the application, if you haven't looked at it already, that you're going to be making that case, that we ask you to provide us some idea about how you've been impacted by the COVID pandemic. How has it impacted your staff? How has it impacted your bottom line? Has it made it difficult for you to do programming? We're guessing the answer is yes to all these questions. I'm going to share my screen here shortly and introduce you to the website if you haven't seen that already. And I also want to acknowledge the work of my colleague, Trey Mitchell, who's our Director of Communications, who's keeping this content up to date. An important aspect of this funding is that we're providing guidelines in Spanish. If you have any language requirements, and Spanish is it, then you should be able to access the guidelines in Spanish. The fact is, though, that you will have to fill out the application in English, but the application is set up so with Google Translate activated in it. So if you do have a different language other than Spanish or English, you can actually turn on Google Translate and look at the application in the language you prefer. Let me pause here. I think we have somebody in the waiting room still, maybe. I want to admit, yeah, Christopher Tyree is waiting. So let me let him join. Likewise, just to say a word a bit about the funding levels, you'll see that we've provided 4 tiers of funding. And just a reminder to people to mute their.
Good morning, everyone.
Hey, how are you?
I'm looking forward to seeing all of you. I want to remind us.
Okay. So we have 4 levels of funding: 4,000, 8,000, 14,000, and 20,000. And we have actually more opportunities at the lower level because we're really hoping to get smaller organizations in under the tent as much as possible. We tried to distribute the money across the board to kind of be equal at all levels. Obviously, people want as much money as possible, and we will try to work within the applications we get to make it an equitable distribution. Just be aware, though, that there is additional funding out there that Governor Northam has just announced, that the state has $353 million of ARP funding, and some portion of that, $250 million, will go to an initiative called Rebuild Virginia. And that does include funding for operating costs for museums and archives. So do keep your eyes on that as an opportunity that you could use to let me be clear about that, to complement what you might get from us. You don't want to overlap. So if you're looking at your strategy overall, you might think about coming to us for humanities programming support, and then go to the Rebuild Virginia initiative for operating support. That way you can maximize your opportunity and be able to get all of your needs fulfilled. So we'll share some of this information with you here in the chat, and also anything we share here will be also recorded as noted, so you can access the full recording, and also these links and resources will all be on the website. So don't worry if you miss something in this conversation. It's hard to keep track of these things, and it's hard to keep track in the chat, but we'll provide that all after it. So I'm going to share my screen now. And I'm going to start by looking at the website. This is virginiahumanities.org/grants/sharp-grants. This information here is very similar to information you might have received notice of this grant through our Foundant system. We notified everybody who's previously received a grant from us or who's simply registered in our system. All of you would have gotten notification about this. This provides an overview of the SHARP money that we've received. It's more than $900,000 that we are awarding in grants out of the total money we received. So that's about $300,000 more than we had for CARES funding. So it is significant money. You'll see the important deadlines. Obviously, the applications opened this week on Monday. You have a little over a month from tomorrow. So take your time. You can draft your application. You can work on it as time permits. It's designed to be a simple and straightforward application. It is not as lengthy as our typical application. And then decisions will be announced by September 20th. We will attempt to award the money as soon as we have the proper paperwork in place, and we'll talk more about that probably later down the road. This deadline about work on the grant must be completed by November 30th is the NEH deadline to us, because we need to wrap up, or more correctly, you need to finish your work so that we can get your report and then report to NEH how everything has gone. We're hopeful that, given a little over a year, that you'll have time to implement any kind of programming you have in mind, that it gives you the space to do the work. I think if you need extensions, I think that would be possible as well. And as noted, I'm the contact. This would launch an email to me. I'm happy to take your emails, and it always helps if you put SHARP in the subject line, just to make sure I notice it more quickly. This will link you to guidelines in English and then guidelines in Spanish. We are going to make 111 awards across the 4 tiers of funding. That's the plan. That could change. That's sort of based on what the need is. So just so you know, there will be some competition, we assume, but we don't know. With CARES, just for the record, we awarded everybody that applied. There was no one that was turned down for CARES funding. That would be our ideal scenario here, is that everybody gets money. And that's what we'll aim to do. But we assume there will be some competition. The important thing to consider here, beyond just the eligibility, which we'll touch on next, is what can you do with this money? And these are guidelines that are quoted directly from NEH. And that's probably the easiest way for us to give them to you so that you can figure out what they mean. If you were looking at general operating support, you can do any number of things with that money, and that can include strategic planning, capacity building, anything related to preparing, responding to, and recovering from the coronavirus. Technical consultant needs. Have you had to get a Zoom subscription? Have you had to invest in video equipment, new cameras? Whatever that might be, that could be supported with this, as long as it does not exceed 20% of the total. Expansion. Have you had to open up outdoor venues, outdoor seating, amphitheaters, transitioning to hybrid events? Whatever that might be, that could be included under this category of expansion. Equity assessments and planning related to the coronavirus and the economic crisis is a new thing. Nothing like this was in CARES. This is really a purposeful effort on NEH's part to make sure that organizations are thinking about the ways in which they make their humanities content more broadly available, and even within their own organizations, how they deal with equity and diversity. You'll notice in the application, we'll ask you some questions about the audiences you serve. If you are serving, there's a fairly long list of communities that might include incarcerated individuals, for example, people of color. I will look at that list when we get in the application, but simply to say that that's an area we're looking at, and that if you do serve that audience, you would gain some additional heft for your application. And finally, humanities programming. That's really the heart of what we do. And we obviously look to that kind of work with enthusiasm. We would be really pleased to see your organization being in a position now to not simply sustain and preserve your staff, but to be able to serve your public. And that might be any kind of thing that falls under humanities program, whether it's public talks, library talks, my colleagues could probably give you some examples. I mean, I think you know what these things are: museum exhibits, virtual exhibits, getting content out to the communities who you've really not been able to reach this past year. If you have questions about any of these, please feel free to reach out to us. It's fairly, as I say, it's fairly broad. And when you're in the application and you're writing a somewhat short narrative statement, I think it's a page and a half. It may be no longer than that. It will be useful for you to touch on these categories and describe what you have in mind. As always, though, NEH's intention here is for you to explain how you've been adversely impacted by the coronavirus. And as I said, you'll be able to tell us a little bit about how your bottom line has been impacted, but tell us too in your narrative how your programming has been impacted. How has has it affected your ability to process collections, to get new material, to have school visits, whatever that might be. The eligibility here is expressly given to us by NEH. We want you to be able to think about how to the degree to which you are a humanities organization, which is why we're providing you a link to NEH's definition of that. That's always kind of a question for all of our grants, what's the level of humanities? We are happy to talk to you about that. And so, as I say, feel free to reach out to any of us on this call. Matthew, Justin works a lot with grant recipients in the state and is happy to talk with you about that as well. Or at least I'm speaking on his behalf, but I'm sure he's giving me a thumbs up. So I'm not speaking out of turn. I don't want to spend a lot of time on eligibility because I think in some cases you're going to want to ask us directly about your organization, and we welcome you to reach out to us and ask us. You can go ahead with an application because part of our assessment process will be determining the eligibility. So if you have doubts, but you think you're qualified, just go ahead and apply. I think that you make that case for your humanities programming, and we'll judge it on that as long as you fit within the categories. But if there are some fiduciary issues, or if you are a organization that's kind of on the edge, please do let us know. As noted before, anybody that has received CARES funding is eligible, but be careful that you're not already getting federal funding in some other front, because you cannot overlap these funds with another federal grant. So these are the organizations not eligible. And as I say, this is on the website. So I think what we'll do with that one note is, if you've gotten a CARES grant, you'll know this criteria, this requirement. You have to have a DUNS number. You'll be reminded of that in the application, and allow yourself time for that. You won't actually need that number until we actually make an award. So we're not talking about absolutely needing that number until mid to late September at the earliest, but be aware that that's something you'll want to do. So I'm going to go into the application, and I'm going to pause here briefly to see, Raina, does anybody have any questions that we might want to address now before going further? Anything?
I haven't seen any, Sue.
Okay, all right. I'm going to click onto the online application, and we're going to go into a system called Foundant. Foundant is the platform that many humanities organizations use for grants applications. Many of you will have used it before. It's fairly straightforward to use, but we will share with you a link to a YouTube video on how to set up an account and how to set up your organization's record, which is a much better demonstration of how to do it than I could provide here. So what I'll focus on is our application, but I want you to be able to have that technical help for just getting into Foundant generally. So I'm going to click into the online application, and do you see my screen, the Foundant portal, or do I need to shift? You do see it, okay. So I already have an account. I'm going to just log on. If you've forgotten your password, click on that and it'll be emailed to whoever created your account. I need to change my role as an applicant. So I'm going to act as an applicant coming into the system. So you can see I have an organization record. I belong to ABC Humanities. I'm from Dux, Virginia. Everything looks correct there. You might take the time to review all of that to ensure that it's accurate, because if it's not, you can click on this pencil here and update that. I need to scroll down. Actually, I can't see it on my screen. Actually, you know what? I can't see on my screen because I've already created an application for SHARP. So I started that last night and I couldn't back out. So be aware of the fact that once you start an application, you can't delete it and start over. It's in the system. You can revise it, you can edit it, you can abandon it, but you can't delete it. So I've already created one last night, so I'm gonna go in and edit it. All right, it's going to provide you some important information up at the top, the due date for your application, which is August 16th at 5 p.m. It's also going to tell you that anything with this little blue, or the blue eye tells you that there's something important here. Any field with an asterisk is required. I'm going to collapse all the levels of the application just to give you kind of an overview of what it looks like. There's essentially 5 sections. We only see 4 here because we haven't gotten our funding track open. But you've got a section that's all informational. It's this About Virginia Humanities SHARP grants. That's sort of repeating a lot of what you've seen on the website, but it tells you a little bit more about what to expect in the application. The eligibility questions have a lot to do with your organization's, the type of organization you are, if you're a nonprofit, and we'll see some of those as we go into it. The organization will ask you a lot about what your organization is and does. And it's there that you'll be asked the simple question of whether you're a humanities organization or not. And that will determine the funding track. If you are a humanities organization, you will be funding track 1. And if you answer it as a yes, then that's the set of questions you get asked. If you are a non-humanities organization, you'll be presented track 2 and be answering those questions. So the questions will be tailored to the type of organization you are. And then finally, there's a simple grant certification. It does not require a handwritten signature. It simply requires that you certify that what you've applied to is truthful and the date that you're certifying it. So we do not require a handwritten signature until actually an award is made. So that's important to note as sort of a major difference between other grants you might have received from us. That's to simplify this process. So let's just open the section, look a bit at it. Like I said, this is kind of repeating a lot of what we've seen at the website. Be aware of the fact that we really want you to ask for the full amount in that tier. So that means you need to think about how you can spend it, if you have the capacity to spend it, if it makes sense for you to ask for 20 when actually you're more likely in the 14,000 range. You know, not surprising, a lot of people are coming in to ask for 20, but note the distribution here. This is not fixed in stone. This could shift, but there are fewer grants at the higher level. That's why I'm suggesting you think a little bit about your strategy with you're thinking about supplementing it with this other state money that's available, because that might give you better funding overall. As I said, funding is in 2 tracks. As I said, track 1 is for humanities organization, and that's a very broad category of general operating support. So that means you can use that money for anything that was listed. Whereas funding in track 2 is more limited. If you are a non-humanities organization, you are expected to do this, use this money for humanities programming. So that's the distinct difference here.
Sue, could I stop you for a question that
Sure.
relevant to the above? From Leslie, can you ask for different grants for different amounts for different programs?
Oh, from one organization?
Yes.
I suspect not, but I think it would be good to have a kind of a, you know, hypothetical email on what that might look like. Matthew, any thoughts on that? I mean, just on the face of it, the question.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the NEH, as far as I understand it, sort of resists the idea of kind of double dipping, if you will. So if you're going the route of you know, general operating support, that's one track, and if you choose that track, then you can't really go the route of the program sort of needs. So in other words, we can't give 2 sharp grants to one organization. It has to be one sharp grant for us per organization. And again, if you then look at the governor's Rebuild Virginia program, again, as those are federal funds, you also want to make sure that you're not overlapping federal funding from one organization or another organization for the same project, if that makes sense. The federal government does not like sort of you people taking money from 2 different places, federal money from 2 different places, and using it for the same purposes. They have to be used for different purposes. I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the issue would actually come out in the fact that one organization will have one DUNS number, and so we will see one DUNS number receiving 2 grants, and that might set up a red flag.
Sue, I think
yeah.
You know, I'm reading the questions as maybe there's a concern that if an organization were to apply for a $20,000 grant and not receive it, will they be automatically considered for another amount, or should they apply for multiple tracks? Or, you know what I mean?
No, so that's a totally different reading. Thanks for that, Justin. I think They shouldn't go for multiple tracks. If we find the preponderance, the majority is coming in at 20,000, which is possible, what we'll do is just dissolve the lower levels and spread that money out to the higher levels. This is why I'm saying this is not fixed in stone. You'll notice we didn't put this distribution on the website with that idea in mind, because we don't want it to, there is competition anticipated, but these levels are simply us trying to figure out how to be equitable in this distribution to reach all size organizations. But it is not, it can be accommodating, we can accommodate the need that's out there. That's what we will do. So
right. So those numbers in parentheses are targets, but
exactly.
So it could be a situation where 50 applicants are all receiving 20,000, or.
That's right. As long as we don't exceed the amount of money we have, that's the idea. So we had to have a starting point, how we've got this money, how do we award it? How do we do this in an equitable way to all organizations in Virginia, small and large? For CARES, for example, we gave out many $1,000 grants. And then we gave out up to, was it 20? I can't remember what our total size was, but we had 6 levels for CARES because there are lots of small organizations in Virginia we want to help, but there are also big ones we want to help. And we wanted to represent as much as possible that diversity in the way we distribute the money. But we will distribute the money based on the need as it's expressed in the grants that come to us. So it's a starting point, it's a target, as Justin has said.
I have a question. It's regarding the technology enhancement. I noticed that it was the equipment itself could only be no more than 20% of the amount requested. So what else would be eligible? Would personnel costs be eligible for that?
Yes, if you are a humanities organization, Lisa, and you are looking for general operating support, yes, you could get staff funding, you could get funding for technical support, and you could get money for programming, however you distribute the money. And we'll look a little bit at that budget allocation, but we're just going to ask you, how are you going to spread that money across your work? And you just have to give us a general percentage of how you're going to distribute it.
Okay. And I guess because I did look at the application yesterday and saw those different tracks. And so there's, there's a sense in which there's technology enhancement, there's new programming, and then there's sustainability. And it seems to me like there's, we're interested in a hybrid. It's technology enhancement plus sustainability. So I don't know if maybe in the narrative, so if I opted for technology enhancement, but then explained how this is really about sustainability, if that is acceptable.
I think so. And I think you're absolutely right. It is about sustainability. It's not just equipment. It's your mission going forward. So that's flexible. You use your narrative to explain what that cost is and why you need that money for that purpose. As I say, the general operating support track 1 is more flexible for you because it is for humanities organizations, if that's the category you fit into. Track 2 is going to limit you a bit in terms of how you can spend the money. You're pretty limited to spending it on programming. But to do that programming, it might require you to invest in some technology. So it's not like it's done in isolation. So we expect there to be a little bit of a kind of a blurring of the lines, and that will be fine. And we'll let you know if there are any issues about it.
Thank you.
Sure, you're welcome. Any other questions at this point, Raina? Should I move forward?
I don't think
I've got a question.
There's a question from Jane Collins.
Go ahead, Jane.
Yeah, hi. Our organization, it's called HER, and we contract with local artists to bring creativity and self-expression to people in need. We actually were not too impacted by the pandemic, but we're interested in this grant because we want to further our reach and offer creative expression and programming for people who were, I would call frontline responders, helping during the pandemic. In other words, teachers, parents, nonprofit staff, people like that, people we normally work with to reach their clients. So I'm thinking we would fall under the humanities organization, but also are we eligible, since we are not, this would be additional funding for us to further our reach. It wouldn't be to help us because we were financially impacted.
Actually, Jane, listening to what you're describing, it sounds like you're maybe a more performing arts, that you wouldn't fall under a humanities organization, that you'd probably apply as a track 2 application, and maybe what you're describing is some kind of programming and for your outreach to reach the population you describe.
And Jane, I'll just follow up on that too. I think even though your organization itself wasn't too impacted by COVID, I think because you're relating the content of the programming and outreach to people who were frontline workers of COVID, I think that does allow you to pivot, saying that this is really, I mean, this wouldn't happen without sort of, I think the pandemic that we've all experienced, and that really you're helping with narratives and stories about the people who were frontline workers.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
And without the pandemic, we wouldn't have had the frontline workers. I mean, yeah, I think Matthew's right. But be aware of the fact that you probably come in as a track 2 application, as a non-humanities organization.
Sue, there's another question actually that was directly to me, but I want to put it out there for you as well. Could you explain the eligibility? This is from Laurie Adams. Could you explain the eligibility status of institutions of higher education? IHEs are listed both under eligible and ineligible. Thank you. I didn't realize they were under ineligible.
What was the acronym, IE?
Institutions of higher education.
Okay, so just broadly speaking, institutions of higher education are not eligible, but if it's an entity within an organization of higher ed that has a 501c3 status, they may apply. So there might be a nonprofit within a university that could apply, but the university itself cannot. There are some fairly, complicated NEH guidelines on that I can share. They have in their eligibility guidelines, they do have a link to a federal requirement that explains that. But I think that's the distinction. Does that help? Do you know who the question? Well, that's a question that has come to me already in an email. So certainly follow up with your organizations. Maybe just a bit about who you are, and we'll double check on that.
Yes, that helped. Thank you.
That's good. The section on eligibility, you'll note that a number of these questions are coming from NEH. NEH is asking us to ask you. This will just determine, whether you are eligible, as I noted. So I started filling this out. Most of these questions are going to be radio buttons. You select an answer. There's not a lot of narrative in this application. All of this is determining your federal eligibility. And we're interested in knowing if you got CARES funding, and NEH is also interested. And we're just interested in knowing if you've gotten any federal funding before. And this question about whether your federal funding is 80% or more of your annual gross revenue is a question from NEH.
Sorry, another question about that. Because the CARES funding was federal, and that's the only federal funding that we've received. So should the response is that federal funding outside of CARES, or does it include CARES?
That's a very good question. For last fiscal year, did the CARES constitute 80% or more of your federal funding?
No.
Yeah, or more of your annual gross revenue?
No.
Okay, then you should be okay.
Okay.
But that could happen. So I hadn't thought of that, but that could cause a problem. I suspect that there's an exemption if it's CARES funding. I don't think NEH, that would be my hunch. Why would they penalize somebody who got CARES money to not get ARP money?
Okay, so the question, so the question about, you know, receiving other federal funding, that we can assume that includes CARES?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Just the warning is that you just don't want it to be more than 80% of your gross. Okay. All right.
Okay.
I'm going to go into the third section for the organization information, and you'll note that we're asking you to make the project title Sustaining the Humanities at, and then the name of your organization. That's just going to help us quickly identify your grant opportunity. I'm going to add, you know, is your organization information up to date? You remember we looked at the organization record and where you can edit it. Here's the organization focus, and this is where the different tracks will become available to you depending upon your answer to this question. Most of this is pretty self-evident. You've probably seen a lot of this stuff before, having done other grants. We ask for a mission statement. You can use GuideStar, which is linked directly to the system, to pull in your mission statement if your organization is in GuideStar, and you can look that up while you're working. The organization type list is extensive. This is a list that NEH has provided us. Do your best to try to figure out where you fit. Just be aware that there's I think 20 some options here, and you could fit under 2 categories. So you're allowed to fit, to say 2 different organizations. So I could be both a museum and history, and then I could also maybe be a, what might I be? A state or national park. I'm just making that up, but there you have 2 options there. As I noted, in introducing the whole process, we talked about categories that are especially encouraged by NEH. So if your organization serves any of these communities or falls under any of these categories, you'll simply say yes or no. You don't have to specify which one at this point, but that will help your application, as will the priority communities that we're looking to serve. And again, this is a fairly long list of people. Jane, maybe, I don't think that there's any category for people who maybe are on frontline workers in this category, but certainly people with disabilities, people living with addiction or mental illness, any community like that that you're serving, please let us know. And then this is pretty straightforward. The organization folks, your staff, we want to ask about. Here's where we get into some of the more detailed information about the impact of the virus on your organization. So if you're able to provide this, we are requiring this, and this may be a challenge. If you don't have exact numbers, give us a ballpark. We just want to know, like, what was your baseline in 2019, and then what happened to you in 2020, and what do you anticipate in 21, 22? We hope to be able to show here that there's a trajectory that we know went down last year, but that is going up in the coming year. That we're going to help you, that will help you potentially restore employees and staff that you lost, both full-time, you're being asked about here, and part-time. Yes, part-time, and then volunteers. So for 2019, 2020, and then kind of what your projections are. Here we want to know just about the impact of the coronavirus on your organization. Check as many of these apply, and I've looked at some of the early applications, and organizations are selecting as many as 6 of these categories. So clearly the impact has been great. Any questions at this point? Let me go back here. I want to select one of these tracks because I want to just show you those questions. And that's way up here. Or is that actually in the, I always forget where that question is. Okay, I'm going to select the humanities organization because that's what I am. And I'm going to go back here. And now you'll see I've got track 1 open to me because I answered that question yes. And this is where the sort of the meat and potatoes of the grant application are. This is where you're going to select those categories. So, you know, Lisa, you were talking about several categories. I think you were the one that said you might be doing it in more than one category. Here's where you would select whatever it is you plan to do. And here's where you're going to describe in brief your project. This is just sort of a high level description. We're going to give you an opportunity to say a bit more down below. You're going to select your funding level. You're going to select the categories of sort of how it's going to help your organization. And if we don't address it there, then use this field of other to let us know. NEH is very interested in knowing how many jobs will be retained and how many might be created as part of this. So this is really key information for us to know from you. Actually, that should be required. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. There's a question when we were in the staffing section. How are we defining employee? You've mentioned part-time employees or full-time, and the question is, how is employee defined regarding funding? I don't know if Victoria Kenny, if you want to elaborate on that question.
Hi, yeah. So part of what we're looking to do, we have a commissioned opera that we're working on, and our group is a nonprofit Baroque organization. So we educate Baroque practice through historical and performance means and instrumental. And we commission works of art. And so we're working on an opera. But my question to you is a singer or technical assistant contracted for this type of show an employee for purposes of this grant? Because they're not employees for taxes or benefits, but they are working for us and will receive economic benefit from the show. Is that something that falls into the category of what we're allowed to use the funding for?
So it's sort of a seasonal employee?
Correct. It would be for this particular item. You know, we don't have any paid employees otherwise. It's all volunteers. And you know, we're trying to it's an opera geared towards the LGBTQ community anyway. Right. So it does fall into being eligible for a lot of things, but that was a specific question one of my colleagues had, and I wanted to make sure I put that out there.
Yeah, that's kind of a tricky one. I think in some ways, if you focus on the jobs retained in terms of just your management and administration to keep your operation running, but that maybe you look at those contract work positions as some of the cost of your request. I think there's a spot to talk about contractor professional services. I mean, explain it in your narrative, if nothing else, that this is needed for you to do this work. But just in terms of the impact of jobs, I mean, I guess what you're saying is that these people were out of work when you were not operational.
Correct. Or you know, it's providing employment to several local artists that had, you know, for COVID reasons, didn't have work for a while. There weren't any gigs out there. So we are providing employment for them for this.
Sure. You could also just simply calculate about how many full-time employees you would have in that, you know, do you have 3 people that might be the equivalent of 1 FTE, that kind of thing? And then just say it's retaining 1 job, but explain that in the narrative maybe. As for the purposes of what we tell NEH, it's sort of the equivalent of 1 full-time employee, and that's fine. This is not going to be precise. We're not able to actually deal with half-time positions very well either. That's why we're rounding up. So it's going to be a very blunt instrument, but that's okay. You know, I think you want to account for that in that way, probably. Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
And Sue, for organizations that are completely volunteer run, I know in the application there's an option to just simply put 0 for jobs retained. That's an issue.
Yeah, and there's also, I think, a category for volunteers to quantify the volunteers that you might have won and lost. Again, I think whatever kind of unique condition you have that's not addressed by this application, highlight that for us. We will be sensitive to your unique needs because it's not a one size fits all. Some organizations may only have one FTE, but rely on a lot of unpaid labor and or contract work. So please just let us know what your situation is and how you've been impacted. That's the key here.
Yeah, and Sue already mentioned this, but this round of funding is a lot more flexible than the previous CARES Act funding, which prioritized job creation and retention. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Justin is right about that. I think, as you know, we're trying to make clear is this is really not just looking backward, but looking forward. We want to help things. We want to help support work that's going to get you whole again, if you will. I think that's about it on, an important aspect here. After you do a description of your project impact, and that's just kind of a general, like how you see this money helping you to respond to the pandemic. We're providing you kind of limits so that you're aware of how much space and the maximum limit, and don't worry about getting to that maximum. Be concise, be short. We don't want extensive narrative here. You don't need it. It's just a high level description. And the project plan, same thing, 2.5 pages at the most, or 1,200 words. And please enter it all here. You do not need to upload Word documents, no uploads. It's all happening right in this in this form online. Remember to save your work as you go so you don't lose anything, and the save button's way down at the bottom. So just keep that in mind. So finally, a word about the budget. As I said, we don't need dollar amounts. We don't need you to tell us how you're going to spend $4,000. We simply want to know how you're going to distribute it across the project. So here's a highlight of the budget categories you're going to find. And in answer to the question, I don't remember the name, you were asking about your part-time workers or your contract workers. You could put that under the category of contract services for those people you hire for your performances. So you will have an opportunity here to add the percentages for your overall budget. So figure out the money you're going to go for, and then figure out how much in each category, and then just figure out what percentage of the total that is. It doesn't have, you can change that in the actual, work of the grant. If you find you have to adjust these categories, you don't have to let us know. You don't have to get permission. Unless you make a pretty serious course adjustment, but even that I don't think is going to require a lot of input from us. So it's just simply that your percentage is total 100. That's all you have to do here. And if it doesn't apply, just enter 0. Anything that falls outside of this that you need to tell us about, use this space right here to explain it. Okay, and that's it. And then quickly, I'll just show you the grant certification. As I said, you do not have to sign it. You have to simply agree that everything on the application is true, complete, and accurate. Say that you agree, provide us the date, give us your title, which is down here, and then your name, which should probably match it should match the authorizing official who's actually made the grant application. And then you'd save it down here. If for some reason you decide you need to start over or you change your mind, this is where you would click on abandon the request, and you can do that at any point. So I'm going to save that. And it's helpfully telling me all of the questions I didn't answer, so I know what I have to do when I come back. So Jane, question?
No.
I have a small administrative question. So we're a small organization. I mean, there's only one paid staff person, who is me. And of course, we have a board of directors. And so on the, the contact, of course, I'm the contact, but then for the fiscal contact. Our treasurer, our board treasurer just resigned. So that's who I would normally put. And I'm thinking, well, maybe I should just put our board president. Because I don't know who else our fiscal contact would be other than our accountant who does our audit.
Yeah, I think your board president would be fine. It just has to be a second person with some, you know, responsibility for the organization. That's fine.
All right, that's what I'll do. Thanks.
Yep. Raina, do we have any questions that came in?
Oh, sorry. I turned on my video and not my mute. I haven't received any other questions. Oh, wait, let's see. From Leslie, does the signer need to be an employee of the organization? Can a volunteer fill it out?
The signer?
Of the application, I think at that certification line.
Wow, horrible.
So,
right.
Somebody might have just joined who needs to mute their phone.
Rudy. All right, so we need insurance info. You're awesome, Rudy. You're awesome.
Hey, Erica, is there any way you can
right.
Erica, is there, I think it's coming out of your, can you mute?
Yes, Mr. Secretary.
Perfect.
Yeah, I just muted Erica, I think. We might have had a few people who joined us after, who were waiting in the waiting room and didn't get in. I didn't notice them. We are recording this for your, so you can listen to it later. We'll put it on the website. The question is about having a volunteer staff submit and or certify the application. I think probably not. We would need to have an authorized official of the organization who has some management paid relationship to the organization.
Right. So it couldn't be just a general volunteer, but if it's a board member.
Yes, a board member could do it.
Type of official, more of an official capacity within the organization.
Exactly.
And it would probably have to be one of the officers of the board, either chair, vice chair, or treasurer. Yeah. With that signatory capacity.
Someone with a legal stake, volunteer or paid.
Anybody else have a question?
I haven't received any others.
Okay.
I did share, or I tried to share the tutorial for the Foundant video in the chat. Hopefully that will work.
Okay. Yeah, it's only about 3.5 minutes long. If you guys haven't, some of you haven't yet logged into the system, aren't familiar with it, take the time to do that. It's very helpful. Yeah, contact info. My direct link to my email is on the Virginia Humanities Sharp website. And I'll also tell it to you here so you can write it down if you'd like. My email is ssh8, the number 8, A is an apple, at virginia.edu. And if you will, just add Sharp to the subject line in your organization. That just will help me keep track of it, and I will try to answer as quickly as possible, especially if you have questions about eligibility, which is where most of my questions have been, is my organization eligible to do this kind of work? I will try to answer as best as possible. We're trying to be fair to all. So if you're just not sure, I think the easiest thing is for you to just go ahead and apply. And I hope we've made the application process easy enough for you to do that, so you don't have to deliberate too much on the yes or no to apply, but you should just do it. We do plan to have another one of these sessions. Let's see, it's Monday next. I had that up on my screen. It's on the website. We will, depending upon who's there, if it's people, repeat guests with just more questions, we may not go through the whole application process. We'll kind of wait and see. But I invite you to join us if you want to, a second session. Thanks, Raina. Just put it in the chat. It's next Monday, July 19th at 10 o'clock. All right then. Well, if we have no more questions, thank you all. Oh, Leslie, you're saying goodbye. Okay. Okay, thanks all. Thank you and goodbye. Take care.
Thank you.